the mother here is acting like a child and the mother-in-law is acting like a toddler. And so between the two of them, the fact that it's not going too well is not that much of a surprise. Welcome to Mom Alternative, where we read and respond to typical motherhood and relationship stories. Today is all about what it takes to make a marriage work. We'll be covering, should you expect your husband to get a vasectomy, how to tell that you shouldn't get married, and what women often appreciate in their husbands. This one is titled, Am I the a-hole for expecting my husband to get a vasectomy? My husband and I have been together for almost 10 years and have 4 kids. Our youngest is 6 months old and my pregnancy was high risk and birth was extremely traumatic with a long hospital and NICU stay. He kept putting off the conversation about getting a vasectomy, but I thought that he'd eventually do it when things got less hectic. He recently told me that he wouldn't and it wasn't up for discussion. Am I the a-hole for being upset about it? Editing to add context, I was planning to get my tubes tied after our last baby and I was okay with that, but because I was hemorrhaging after the C-section and suffer with a bleeding disorder, it wasn't possible, and I would have to be put under for the procedure due to other health issues. So yes, I guess I just expected that the next best and safest thing would be for him to get a vasectomy. I would never force him to do anything that he didn't want to do, but I am upset that he would rather me risk my life than him to have a much simpler procedure done. My body has never tolerated hormonal birth control, and we've always done the calendar and pull-out method, and it's worked so far, but it's only so effective and another pregnancy could be life-threatening for me. So I don't want to risk it. It was assumed by both of us that I would have my tubes tied until the complications occurred, so I'm hurt that he won't do this to prevent me from having to be put under again to have this procedure done. Now, I think that she adds a lot of context around that to try and make herself seem a little bit better, to try and make her request and her perspective and her assumption that he should get a vasectomy not quite as terrible as it is at face value. Honestly, I don't think that any of that context makes it all that much better. Fundamentally, I do believe that men have a right to decide what happens with their bodies just as much as, in this type of case anyway, as much as a woman should have the right to decide what happens with her tubes, for example. Fundamentally, like, I personally am not the biggest fan of permanent birth control methods in general, but that's a personal choice. I understand that for other people, that's a medical decision that they feel like they want to make for themselves. However, a vasectomy is intended to be permanent birth control. I know that some people will argue vasectomies can be reversed and in some cases it works out, so it's not really quite that permanent. And I know that also other people will argue it's a really small tiny thing, it doesn't really matter for the man. I actually think it's a pretty big deal. Like, if the outcome is that you cannot have kids, you have now made the choice that you will not be able to have children for the rest of your life, and obviously in the case of this marriage that may well be the case, you're not going to have children for the rest of your life, but it is possible, there's always this chance for me that something happens in the future that makes you regret that choice. And I have read stories even on this forum of people who make that choice to get permanent birth control done. And then, 5 years later, they would really love to have the opportunity to have another child, and then they decide not to. So no, I actually don't think, for men, for example, there's also the chance that this marriage falls apart for whatever reason, and then they have had a vasectomy for the sake of a wife who didn't want to have kids anymore, but it's that decision impacts only them for the rest of their life. And that's pretty horrifying. Fundamentally, I don't think that anyone, even within the context of a marriage, can decide for the other person, you should have this done. I think that that's pretty cruel. I understand that she has a bunch of health complications and getting tubal litigation done is maybe like a problem for her. I think that there are by far enough birth control methods out there that they can use instead without her having to force him or wanting him to go through a permanent procedure. So yes, there's this really ironic part of it when she says he kept putting off the conversation about getting a vasectomy, but I thought that he'd eventually do it when things got less hectic. Sounds to me like he was really like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. I really don't want to do this. And then she kept insisting, kept bringing it up until eventually he was like, I'm not going to do that. And I think that's fair enough. I honestly believe that that this is a personal choice and it should be a personal choice. I do actually, that said, because maybe this sounds a little bit contradictory for some people, I do actually think that it is very cruel if someone decides to get a vasectomy or to get the tubal ligation done without talking to their partner, because there you are making, again, a decision that impacts both of you equally, and you're making it as an individual. And so while I don't think that you can force people to change something about their bodies, I also think that it is really cruel and really unfair to have someone in a marriage with someone else and to make the decision unilaterally by yourself that you do not want to have children. That is a decision that I think needs to be made by the couple. Maybe that's a little bit hypocritical in some ways. To me, it makes perfect sense. Like, I would not be okay with my husband making his own decision with regards to no more kids without me being involved in that at all. But I also wouldn't expect him to do this kind of thing either. So some of the comments here, this person says, yes, you are the a-hole. You assumed it was something that he wanted, and it's clearly not. It's not your body, and though getting your tubes tied is more invasive, if you're that set on not having any more kids due to your issues, then you need to be the one to take the next step, and he can do his part and wear condoms. Exactly. Like, it's really quite simple. If this is something that is so major to you, that the risk of it is so high to you, and you're not happy to go with any other forms of birth control instead, then you kind of have to bite the bullet there yourself. Next person says, you have the right to be upset, and you're not an a-hole for feeling that way. You feel disappointed that he won't undergo a change with his body like you had to. If he doesn't want to do it, though, you can't force him, and you need to think of a different plan. I got my tubes removed 6 months after having my third baby. My husband said that he would get a vasectomy, but he has crippling anxiety in hospitals. He's a mess. It's hard to get him there, and he passes out and overthinks everything and just goes into a panic. Plus, I can't be on birth control because I just bleed. I got my tubes removed, and it was a super easy and fast surgery. I was walking 2.5 miles 24 hours later. I was working a 12-hour shift 3 days after. Now, I always find it hilarious when people make these kinds of personal anecdotes. They share these personal anecdotes as though they are there to help the person come to terms with the idea of getting her tubes tied. And to me, they never sound quite so convincing. You may be one of those lucky people who has a really easy recovery. Other people might not have an easy recovery. So I would just never share my personal experience and be like, well, yeah, you see how easy it was. That's why you should get it done. I think this statement, you feel disappointed that he won't undergo a change with his body like you had to due to your pregnancy. This is one of those things where if you spend your whole life railing against the fact that there are biological differences between men and women, and that pregnancy and childbirth and just being a mother is a lot more physically, biologically taxing on the female body than it is on men, then I kind of feel like it's kind of your own fault. You need to get a little bit over it. Yes, maybe it's not fair that there are differences between men and women, but that's just reality. That's just the way that the world is. When you make the choice and you make the decision to have kids, then you should make that with the understanding that that will change your body in some kind of ways. And no, you can't expect your partner or wish or hope that your partner would go through a similar change physically as well. Like, that's not, this comparison here is a little bit mind-boggling to me. It seems to me that it has to come from a place of slight self-delusion where you just can't accept that there are differences between men and women. This one is pretty interesting. She says, would you be upset if he was trying to push you towards something you didn't want? If he doesn't want it done, then talk about what other measures you can both do to prevent more pregnancies. And another person replies, yeah, but men expect women to go on birth control or get their tubes tied all the time. A lot of times it's a more passive expectation, but it's still an expectation. And then the first person still replies to that one. She says, right, but that makes us women resentful because we don't want it expected of us, just like her husband doesn't want it expected of him. That's why I said they need to communicate what other options they can agree on. One cannot demand another to do something that they don't want. If that's the case here, they have bigger problems. So there is always, I don't know what it is about these types of topics, but there's always a sense of like men versus women. And I don't know, maybe it's some element of generalizing, it's just shoving the whole groups together. And so in the context, even though technically speaking, this is just one couple, right? It's just one wife with her husband and the decision that they want to make amongst each other. But then obviously everyone else comes in, they project their own circumstances, their own experiences towards it. And then on top of that, they shove and lump all men into one big group and all women into one big group. And then they're like, well, if men get to expect it from women, then she should get to expect it from him as well. And now you're going so many layers above what the original issue was and what the person wanted help with, that you're not going to get anywhere. It's definitely not a good way of dealing with it. Another comment that I wanted to pick up on from this case, this person says, so unpopular opinion here, but after 4 kids, yes, I'd expect him to do his part by getting a vasectomy. All these women suggesting that you should get your tubes tied or removed obviously don't understand how a vasectomy is compared to that. To me, this sounds a little bit evil. I would expect, you can only harbor this sense of resentment towards men for not going through pregnancy if you are just deluded, if you're just in denial about the real life state of affairs. This is just reality. It is actually kind of a superpower that only women have access to. And then, yes, okay, it might have some negative consequences. It might have some other risks. It might have some other impact on their bodies that they don't like. This is all the case. Like there's some positive, there's a lot of positive actually. You get a baby out of it, and then there's some negative as well. But fundamentally, that's just the role of the woman. That cannot be usurped by the man, unfortunately. But it just can't. And you can wish and hope and pray as much as you like. You can have this expectation, which I think is a really terrible expectation, but you can have this expectation that he needs to suffer physically as well to make things equal. That's not right. That's not right. You just were born a woman, and you'll be a much happier woman if you accept that means that you have different abilities, different skills when it comes to birth and pregnancy. That's just not going to be done by a man. One person does take offense at this, and she says, my husband does his part by taking care of me during our pregnancy so I can rest and be healthy, and taking care of our kids alongside me when they are born. And another one replies to her. She says, I have had 3 children and I would never expect my husband to get a vasectomy because of that. I also chose to have the children. I did extensive research on both getting my tubes removed and him getting a vasectomy. Yes, I agree. It's so much easier for a man to get a vasectomy, but it's still his choice. My husband approached me before I really even started thinking about having the discussion on what we wanted to do, as we were both sure we were done after the birth of our 3rd child. He decided that he wanted to get a vasectomy without me even starting the conversation. I did tell him, though, that if I had to, for some reason, get a C-section, I would get my tubes removed at the same time. I didn't have a C-section, so he went and got the vasectomy. If we do not want anyone dictating anything to us as women about our reproductive health, we need to extend the same courtesy to men and their reproductive health. I think OP's husband should at least have a conversation with her explaining why he doesn't want to get a vasectomy, though. I disagree with this. Actually, I think that just the reason of I don't want to, it doesn't feel right to me, is a perfectly valid reason, and no one can force you to do any, it's a physical change that you have to undertake to your own body. You can just say, it just doesn't feel right to me. I don't want to do it. I don't think that you need to justify it any more than that. I don't think you need to go into, maybe it's going to be really painful, or maybe there are these complications. That's it's not, you don't need to do any of that. All that said, I think that I appreciate at least that this person has enough self-awareness to be like, yeah, I had 3 pregnancies as well, and I still would never expect my husband to get a vasectomy just for myself. There are a couple of people who back up that original person. They're like, I agree with this. It's the least that he could do, and so on. And then another person, a vasectomy is much less invasive than a tubal for her. There's no way that I would be having penetrative sex with him again until this was sorted. And that's so horrendous and awful. You're saying essentially, it's almost blackmail. If you understand that sex is a need, like a physical need for the majority of men, and then you decide that you're going to withhold sex unless someone undergoes a physical procedure that changes their body in a permanent way, then I'm pretty sure everyone can understand why it's a bit coercive, right? It's coercive and it's wrong and it's blackmail. This completely messes me up as a statement. one person does reply to this. She says, yes, a vasectomy is much less invasive in comparison. I really am shocked by how many women will try to force or manipulate their spouses into getting a vasectomy. If it was the other way around and a man said that he would not have penetrative sex with his spouse until she got her tubes tied or removed, every woman on here would completely lose their minds on him. Why is there so many double standards? Why do so many women expect no one to tell them what to do when it comes to our reproductive rights? But when it's a man's reproductive rights, they think that they should have a say and should be able to expect the man to get a vasectomy. And that is a good summary of this in general. I do not think it is right to have this kind of expectation. I think any type of birth control in general should be a group decision, should be something that both of you decide together. And that's pretty much all there is to it. The more you try to coerce, the more you try to force it, the more you try to pretend that there's some kind of equal split between men and women. And if women have to get pregnant, then men have to be the ones that suffer through permanent birth control, then you're going to be sorely disappointed, because that's just not, it's not right. Our next one is titled, I feel like marriage is not a smart decision these days. Please prove me wrong. For example, me and my partner have been together for almost 10 years. We are engaged and have 2 kids. I have doubts of being with him forever some days due to issues I won't explain. But even if we end up mending our relationship, I still don't think I would marry him, because statistic-wise, you're more likely to divorce than stay together. I am very financially stable. I have a large savings I worked hard for. I have a house and a car all in my name. My partner has debt. Don't get me wrong, he's got a decent job, but if we were ever to divorce, he would get half of everything. That means all my hard work, savings and home could potentially go to him, and I could accrue his debt. That sounds miserable, and I would end up being in an awful spot. I'd probably have to sell my house and move into a not as nice neighborhood to afford the loss I could experience from a divorce. I see on the forum people say that a divorce will get worse before it gets better, but why can't we just be together without the dumb marriage license that will screw us if we divorce? I live in a community state, plus if we did divorce, I'd have to hire an expensive lawyer, so that's $5,000 down the drain and probably lots of animosity between us, which could potentially negatively affect the kids. So I get married in the first place. Financially wise, it sounds terrible. I'd rather just us be together, and if it doesn't work out, then we can try and co-parent the best we can and figure it out without the courts. I don't know. Is there something I'm missing? Now, she does sound a little bit like a man. I can totally see a lot of men having the exact same opinion. Generally speaking, it's men who go into a marriage, by and large, like this is a huge generalization, of course, but a lot of men will go into a marriage with more assets, and the woman will be the one that has debt. And then, yeah, they feel like they get screwed by the system, because in the divorce, everything gets split 50-50 unless you have a prenup. And then they feel like all of their wealth was kind of stolen from them and taken away. And not only do they have to deal with the emotional damage and harm of going through a divorce, then they have to deal with the financial ones, the social consequences, and just the costs for a man are intense. And so she's pretty much experiencing the same in her particular situation. She's the one with all the assets, and the partner is the one who has the debt. And so she's thinking about it very much through the lens of the financial situation, how that would impact her. Now, I'm going to be honest and say, I think if this is how you feel about marriage, you shouldn't get married. I don't think it's right to think about marriage this way. I would not be able to live with someone for 10 years and not care if they were in debt, especially if I had savings, if I had if my wealth was high enough that I could help him out with his debt, then I would do that. Like, I think that if you are actually truly committed to each other and you want to stay together forever, then you have to look at your you have to somehow bring yourselves closer, not just in this in the physical sense, not just as in sharing space with each other and living next to each other as roommates, but actually combining your assets and looking after the other person without the expectation that they will pay you back or anything like that. I think this is pretty fundamental in marriage and pretty fundamental in any long-term committed, stable relationship. For me anyway, this is like my personal opinion of what it takes to make marriages succeed. And so if this is your perception, if you've been with someone for 10 years, and I don't know if she's lived with this person for that period of time as well, But let's say you've lived together for 8 years or for 5 years, for a really insane period of time. And you still have everything so separate, and you still have control over all of your assets, and he has control over all of his assets. And you never have this thought or perspective of what's our future going to look like. If you try to split every bill 50-50, there have been stories that we've covered before where people would even split like diaper costs. So every baby item has to be covered 50-50 by each parent. I think this is just a terrible way to live. And what it says to me is that neither of you are there to support the other person if something goes wrong. And you are approaching your marriage or your relationship as if you are roommates, as if you're just individual people who are independent in their own ways and self-sufficient in their own ways, and there's zero reliance on the other person for anything. And if this works for you and makes you happy, then fine, go for it. I would argue that the depths of joy that you have available to you, that you can experience when you are really together, are very, very different from this type of way of living, which I think just sounds to me as if it's very lonely. Because ultimately it's as if you're not really together. You know, you're maybe together on like a superficial, shallow level, and that's fine. Like I said, if that works for you and that makes you happy, then that's what you can do, and you can just go for it. Like, you know, everyone can make their own decisions about how to live. But the idea of saying we're engaged and we have 2 kids, now I'm thinking about getting married, but honestly, do I really want to get married? It's like, do you know how much divorce lawyers cost and all of my money? If this is your attitude heading into a marriage, your marriage is not going to work out. I think that if you want, you can get a prenuptial agreement and you can work on that together. Fine. I have a little bit of hesitation about prenups as well, but this is, again, a personal opinion, works for a lot of other people. Just fundamentally, if you are already dreading it because you care so much about your money and you're already planning for what to do if you divorce, then maybe marriage is not right for you. So I would not be trying to convince this person to change her mind, because I don't think that that's right. I think that it comes from this position of just a very different perspective and a very different mindset. The way that I approach marriage and the way that works for me and my husband is everything. We're just together. We're a team. We are one unit. We're a single unit under all circumstances. When it comes to money, when it comes to decisions, when it comes to family, everything that we do, we agree on together, pretty much. Obviously, we both have our own hobbies. We both do our own stuff. We have our own opinions, and we can veto the other person if we need to. But fundamentally, we trust the other person. We trust each other, that every decision we make is improved if both of us are involved. And that's what a marriage looks like to me. That's pretty much all there is to it. If you can live like that without being married, then probably in your day-to-day experience of being in a relationship might not be very different. Although I have another segment talking about the idea of marriage and how the societal expectations and the societal responses towards marriage are very, very different. But that's your choice. That's a personal choice. Fundamentally, I think that marriages only work out if both people have the same values and both people approach it from the same perspective. And it sounds to me like she does not, like she's she's not at all focused on the values that she shares with her partner and why they may work out. So if I were her, I would probably not get married. And that is pretty much a summary of what the people say here. One person says, I was with my spouse when he was 25. He had no direction in life and worked job to job as a debt collector. I supported us the first couple of years until he found what he loved to do, and now he makes more money than I do 14 years later. Not sure why you don't just get a prenup if losing money is that important to you, but to be honest, you seem indifferent to him anyway. And I think that that's really what comes across. It's very much this attitude of, yeah, you know, we've been together for 10 years and we have kids, actually, which is a different topic. But like, I don't know why we would get married. And then fair enough. I don't know how she said yes to being engaged or why they decided to get engaged to begin with. If they never really sat down and were like, yeah, maybe it's worth us getting married. Like, why not? Some interesting comments here around divorce. This person says, statistically, millennials have less divorce by age range than Gen Xers. So those statistics aren't as accurate. With Gen X, it was 50% of marriages, and millennials, it's 30%. check what legally is the law where you live. Where I live, if you live together, you're common law, and he would get half anyway. Honestly, it sounds like this relationship isn't one you should be in. I have absolutely zero regrets about my marriage, and even if it doesn't work out, oh well, I value our marriage. Yes, actually, this is one of those things where in a lot of places nowadays, if you have been cohabiting for long enough, then technically, legally speaking, you're close enough to married. But that's a different topic. Fundamentally, though, I think that a lot of people go into marriage knowing that, yes, if it doesn't work out, it's going to really suck. And it's going to suck not just because of the money. It's actually going to suck on a deep emotional level. And it's probably in many ways going to change how you see the world, how you approach other relationships. Like, it's going to leave a mark on you. But you believe in the other person enough, and you believe in the experiences that you make together enough that you're happy to take that risk. And that's very much the case for me. Like, if it doesn't work out, which I really don't think it will happen, but who knows? If for whatever reason it doesn't work out, then there's no way that I would ever regret the years that we've spent together being married and the fact that we worked as hard as we could to try and make it work. This person also says, adds a little bit more to it. Technically, the 50% includes all marriages. So those who have been married multiple times, shocker, if you have been divorced once, you're more likely to be divorced again. And it goes up more and more for each marriage. For first-time marriages, it's 30% overall. And then this one, she replies, it doesn't sound like you really want to marry him anyways, because you've listed a number of reasons not to. So why do you want people to change your thoughts? It's not a good look that you're even thinking the cost of a divorce lawyer before you're even married. That doesn't sound like a recipe for success to me. You very well might not feel this way with someone more stable, and maybe that's the true problem here. I don't know. So I find it interesting that people go for these different ways of arguing. A lot of people who are happy with their marriages are like, yeah, you know what, I'm happy with my marriage, it's not a problem. And then some people will take the statistical argument and go, you know what, your statistics there aren't really flying. Obviously, we have no sources, so you need to check these statistics if you want to believe them. But fundamentally, coming at it from this angle of it's not that many marriages that break down if you look at the statistics accurately, and then obviously, irrespective, honestly, of the statistics, even if the statistics were that 70% of marriages fell apart, I would always say it's not that marriages fall apart by themselves. You as an individual and your partner as an individual can decide to change it for yourselves based on how you approach it and how you handle your marriage. So even the statistics are not a good argument. And then other people are like, well, you know what, maybe your mindset heading into this is the one that's in the wrong. And that's probably the one that I stick to the most, because I think that if you get your head in these types of thoughts, you don't imagine what it's like to actually be married and to share everything that you are with each other. And you don't think that might be positive, that might be good, that might be special, that might make you feel more secure and more stable in your relationship, that might make you feel more committed to each other because you've had to make a commitment publicly and legally. Then, I don't think that there's anything else that can be said to you. This one is going to be the last one that we read. She says, if you don't want to marry, then don't marry. I know that marriage was the right choice for me because I believe I'm with the right person. I have no regrets or doubts about my marriage. And that is a joyful note to end on. Honestly, I think the majority of people who end up in happy marriages are really, really happy and cannot imagine not being married to the person that they're married with. And so obviously it's the opposite for people who end up in unhappy marriages. Then they hate the idea of marriage and they go through all of these negative emotions. And if they come out of a divorce, and especially if it's a really painful divorce that involves kids, then what they feel is this extreme negativity towards the concept of marriage as a whole. And that's obviously really sad. Everyone comes into it colored by their own experiences. But I think it's one of those aspects where you have to imagine that, yes, the greater the risk, the greater the reward. So the risk of marriage is very high, but then also the reward that you get from it is as high. On a more positive note, this one is titled Husband Appreciation Post. Anyone else have a fantastic spouse who really does his best to support you in the ways you need? Our 8-month-old son has been in sleep regression for the last month and has been teething and dealing with separation anxiety, whining all day. He has been going to sleep later and later and waking earlier and earlier. And last night, his his wake up was 4 a.m. I broke down. I've had 5 weeks of 15 to 16 hour days with this baby and I just lost it. My husband took over, got the baby back to sleep, and then just held me and let me cry for a bit and then offered some helpful suggestions. Somehow he got the baby to sleep until 9 a.m. I swear he is magic with our son. He gives me time before he goes to work away from our baby so I can refresh and get a break. He takes our baby 2 to 4 hours each day on the weekend so I can have my own time. He handles bath time 3 nights a week. He doesn't even mess around the house and always helps clean. He rubs my feet every night on the couch. He listens to me when I need him most. He is very handy and can fix anything. He can't keep his hands off of me and always tells me that he thinks I'm beautiful. I'm currently 6 months pregnant, fast I know, and he has really supported me through breastfeeding exclusively and being a stay-at-home mom. He looks out for all 3 of us and always has a smile on his face. He calls me every night on his way home from work. He's also shredded and so handsome. Posting a picture of my handsome man, which I hid, unfortunately. I hope other women get to experience happy marriages like this. Tell me about your husbands. Now, I like this thread very much because it gives you this impression of like what women appreciate in a husband, and like it's not very shocking or surprising. It's really the idea of support and being there for someone when they need you, noticing when they're exhausted and being considerate in your actions as well, actually trying physically to take some of the load off them and help out. This idea of being involved with parenting and being focused on your marriage, being focused on your wife, being focused on your kids, looking after all of them and then providing for all of them as well. None of it is completely out there and completely shocking. It's a standard that seems very high, like very hard for a lot of men to meet. And that's quite sad, at the very least on this forum. The vast majority of people are the people who complain about their husbands being the opposite of this and not doing, not looking after their kids, not looking after the house, not caring, not having a job, not caring about their wives, and so on. But honestly, it really fundamentally comes from this place of the more committed you are to your marriage, to your relationship, to your role as a father, then it comes out in your actions, right? You notice it, you see it, and the way that people feel towards each other is very, very different. The dynamic that comes through is very, very obvious in a marriage like this is so different from the types of stories where people are angry and resentful and exhausted and just, tearing their hair out. And so I wanted to put this here as an example of the amount of work and effort and the mentality and mindset that it takes to try and make that happen for yourself. I'll read out a couple of the examples that people have here as well. She says, love to hear this. I feel like all I hear on this app is complaining, and see posts about their significant others cheating. My husband is the best as well. We've been together for 7 years. He's in medical school and is graduating in August. We have dealt with a lot of life stresses while he has been in medical school. We bought a house, sold a house, planned a wedding, got pregnant, had a baby, all while he is in school. The first few months postpartum can be really tough on new parents, but we thrived together. We were such a strong team and he really helped with our son so I could get rest. We have such a great relationship and I feel so incredibly blessed. My son has such a great father and role model. I tell my husband all the time that I feel like I dreamed him into life. Happy for you and your family. And I really want to highlight here this idea of being a team and being on the same side, because I think ultimately that there's a lot of stuff out there about how difficult it is having kids, about how exhausting it is, especially the first few months postpartum, and especially if it's your first baby or your second baby. I think for a lot of people, those are 2 very, very major life changes that take a lot to get through. But the moment that you feel like you have another person there who is able to carry some of the load and who you share that burden with, and the experience of parenting is just so completely different, especially like with a newborn, because the newborn is dependent 100% of the time, and you have this phase of sleep deprivation that you get through. And so when you have another person available to you who is equally as involved and who is equally as committed, then suddenly it feels like just a weight is taken off your shoulders. And that makes such a huge difference to people. Next one, I also have an amazing spouse. I'm so lucky to have him. We have a 3.5-year-old daughter and a 9-month-old twins. We live a very busy, active life, and he works 50 to 55-hour weeks and is a very hands-on dad. When he gets home from work, he takes over tending to the children while I make dinner. We do bedtime routines together, and he puts our toddler to bed every night after we lay the twins down. And I sit on my butt and relax while he does. On the weekends, we share tasks equally, and he usually takes our toddler fishing with him once a week to give me a little relief from 3 kids all day. We definitely have our moments, but for the most part, we are a cohesive team. Now, this life sounds honestly quite intense. The idea of a 3.5-year-old daughter plus 2 babies who are 9 months old, like that's pretty intense. Plus a husband that works 50 to 55-hour weeks. Also pretty, like that's a lot of things put together that at the face of it would give you the impression, let's say a very risky situation could go south very quickly. And it would be, I've said before that every marriage has its ebbs and flows. You have these periods where everything is great and everything is magical. And then these periods where you're really just clawing through the situations that you're finding yourselves in, and you're just trying to make it through to the other side. In this case, this is one of those situations that seems like it would be like that, but then it's so different when you have this type of partner with you instead. And the final one, she says, love this. I will say that I feel like a lot of what you described should be a basic expectation for a husband-father, but it's so sad to see the posts on here of uninvolved partners and the bar is set too low for some men. I also have an amazing husband. We both work from home full-time and are pretty much equal 50-50 parents. Aside from feeding, as the baby is exclusively breastfed, I truly don't know what I'd do without his love and support, and he makes me so excited to have another baby with him. And that kind of summarizes how I feel about my husband. In many ways, I think that it is rare to find these people who are quite this reliable, and it takes a lot of work, I think, on both of your sides to become better for each other and to develop together and to be just different people the way that you need to be to succeed. On a very different note, this one is titled Mother-in-law Taking Baby to Disneyland. So how do I establish healthy boundaries with this woman? Unfortunately, we live together, so I feel like she holds things over my head because we live in her house. For example, if I say no, I don't want my daughter going to Disneyland, this lady will literally throw a tantrum. Crying, yelling, and slamming doors included. I let her take my baby to Disneyland because she was the only one who could babysit for me, and I asked her not to be out late. Meanwhile, she doesn't respond to any of my texts when I attempted to check on her. So around 10:30, I call and ask if she's on her way home. She responds by saying no, because her other grandkids are there and they want to go on more rides. That my daughter is asleep in her stroller. I say, it's late and she needs to come home. I can tell by her tone that she gets upset. She says she's asleep and she will be fine and says she has to go. I'm so tired of the disrespect. Why in the hell is a 1-year-old out so late without her parents? So now I'm just sitting here waiting for her. I'm so upset and I can't even go off on my husband because he is asleep. It's 12:30 a.m. and my daughter is still not home. I think that there is a lot to be said on both sides here that is wrong. Number one, I actually also don't think it's very acceptable to take a 1-year-old baby and keep them outside for quite this long. Like that's a bit much. Number two, though, I don't really get the mother's side here. So unfortunately for them, they live with their mother-in-law, and she says it feels like she holds things over her head because they live in her house. So that's kind of your fault. If you want to be able to establish better boundaries with your mother-in-law, then living with her at her house, presumably, I'm guessing you're not paying her rent or anything like that, so she's doing you a favor, then that's probably your fault. You need to move out. So that's number one. Number two, yes, the fact that she throws tantrums is completely insane. I would not let her babysit my child if she was responding in this kind of way. I think that if adults cannot regulate their emotions and then they're around kids and kids copy their behavior, then you have a serious problem in terms of teaching your kid that yelling and slamming doors and crying because you say no to something is not a good way to respond. Like, it sounds like she never outgrew the age of 2 years old in terms of how her emotional responses are to things like that. And if she calls her up and says, hey, are you coming home soon? And she goes, no. And then what, like, if it were me, I would have, and I had a problem with this, then I would have gone to Disneyland to pick up my child and left. But she just hung up and then sat there in bed and like stewed and got angry and went on the forum to bitch about it. Like, this is not the response of someone who actually cares about their child and who does have a problem with their child being out late for too long. So it's all very, very strange to me. And the husband is asleep. So I would have, again, if I had a problem with it, which I would have, but I also don't think my mother-in-law would do this. If I had a problem with it, then I would have woken up my husband and said, we need to go pick up our kid because it is past midnight and our 1-year-old is still outside. And I don't think I would not be comfortable with that unless it was maybe with me, but I wouldn't do that to my child either. So honestly, the mother here is acting like a child and the mother-in-law is acting like a toddler. And so between the two of them, the fact that it's not going too well is not that much of a surprise. Some of the comments. There's a lot of people, by the way, who tell her to call the cops, which is insane. Like that's a pretty crazy response. Like just go pick your child up. Like why would you call the cops? She didn't kidnap them. You gave them to her to babysit. This person says, I live with my mother-in-law. I have an 8-month-old, which is also the first grandbaby. Living in their home does not equal entitlement to do whatever they please. In fact, I don't even allow my mother-in-law to carry my daughter at all because of her disrespect. You need to get comfortable being the bad guy, aka parenting, and saying no. Who cares if she's hurt? It's not your responsibility. She's a grown-ass woman and she'll get over it. I feel for you, girl, but if you know that she wouldn't answer your updates, why let her take your child? If I were you, I would go off and never let her take her again, at least for a while. 12:30 a.m. with a 1-year-old is absolutely ridiculous and she has no respect for your concerns as a parent. If you let this slide with no consequences, it'll just be the beginning. And then OP replies, it ended up being even worse. Mother-in-law returned her at 2 a.m. And the answer is, again, you are responsible as a parent. If your mother-in-law is doing things with your child and has taken them out somewhere that you don't want them to be, then you should go and get your child back and then you should move out and then you can set boundaries with your mother-in-law. I'm saying this, I don't think that it's acceptable, like the behavior that we saw here from the mother-in-law is at all acceptable, but honestly I think it's just a difference in maturity level. And yes, the mother is a little bit more mature, the mother-in-law is even less mature, so that makes it worse. But then as the person who is the parent, you are fundamentally responsible for ensuring that your kid has the routine, the level of care, the level of babysitting, whatever it is that you want. Like that's your responsibility as a parent. And if other people in your life are not hitting that standard, then you should be the one that steps in and says, this is not okay with me. OP did not choose to do that here. Now, one comment that's a little bit controversial. She says, you got called in last minute to work and needed an emergency babysitter. Now, OP gave a lot of context in the thread before this. Your mother-in-law was the only one available. She said that she would do it, i.e. help you out when you were in a jam, but that she had reservations, tickets, and plans to go to Disneyland that day with her other grandchildren. You expected her to cancel or cut short her other plans because you needed an emergency babysitter, because your baby is so young that it was free for mother-in-law to get her in. You expected her to say, sorry, we have to leave now because the baby needs to go home? No. That isn't fair to the other grandkids. If they want to make the most of their visit by staying until it closes, that's their prerogative. If you wanted your daughter home by a certain time, you could have driven on over, even if it's an hour drive, and had the mother-in-law come out and hand her off to you so you could take her home. You chose not to. So you get what you want. So that's what you get when you ask someone to take care of your child at the last minute. It's not her job to alter her plans because you suddenly need a babysitter. It's not her job to come home early because you said so after she did you a favor by being the one who was able to babysit. You want the baby home? Go get her. As far as being worried, you knew where she was and who she was with. She was where your mother-in-law said they would be, Disneyland, and with the person who you gave her to watch her when no one else would help you out. Maybe mother-in-law should have given you an accurate time that they would be home, but that's the only thing I see wrong here, and that's very slight because she may not have known when they would be leaving. Of course, she told you the baby was okay because she was. It in no way harmed your child. And yes, I kind of agree with that. All that said, I don't think that it's okay for in-laws or anyone to take your child in a random place where you don't know where they are for an unspecified amount of time. Like, obviously, for every reasonable parent, this would be completely out of bounds and not okay. And I would also not be okay with a mother-in-law babysitting my child who throws tantrums if I say no to her about anything, because that seems to me like that would manifest itself in other behaviors that I'm not okay with. Like if you're that kind of person, then I cannot imagine that the only situation in which you're completely ridiculous and irrational is that situation. So I would not be okay with this mother-in-law babysitting my child. And that would kind of solve the problem from the very beginning. Now, OP has all of these other reasons why she had to do it because of work and it was an emergency and so on. But then you kind of put yourself in a bind. And yes, the mother-in-law screwed up by not following your rules as you want them to be. Although it doesn't sound like she gave her a specific bedtime, but okay, fine. if you had given her a bedtime and she says, what? Like, if she said no, then that's also your fault. Fundamentally, I think if you're giving your child to other people to babysit, then that should be under the guise of, these are the very clear rules that I have for my child, and then I'll be getting them from you at this time, no matter what. And then you can negotiate and have a conversation and say, you know, if she says to you, I want to be out for as long as my other grandkids want to be out, and you say, you know what, I'm not okay with that because they might be out until all the way past midnight or 2 a.m. and that's just too late for me, then you can talk about it and you can decide that you can pick the kid up after you're done with work or something else. Or your husband can go pick the kid up after he's done with work. Whatever it is, you can actually talk about it and communicate like grown adult people. Unfortunately, it seems like there are 0 grown adult people in this thread. And that's their problem. On a very happy note, I hope, this one is titled For Fun. What is the worst, craziest comment that someone made to you during your pregnancy? Now, you'll see that a lot of people make some pretty terrible comments to pregnant women. OP says, it never fails to amaze me the comments that people will make to me and others while pregnant. I had an older lady ask me if I was having twins. I am not, because she had twins and I looked her size. I also had a relative who hadn't seen me in a while exclaim, you look huge. I personally don't take offense to the comments because people can just be dumb, but I do think it's amusing, the audacity of some people. My friend had someone ask her if she was due yesterday when she still had 2 months to her due date. Any crazy comments that you have gotten? And I have picked some of the highlights. As you can see, this thread has almost 300 comments in total, so it is a ton. But honestly, there's some comedy gold in here. This one says, I was told that it was amazing that my legs were able to support the rest of my body, especially with tiny feet. I'm literally 5'8", a smidge overweight, but wear size 9 in shoes. My feet are not that little. To be blunt, the final comment was that I looked like a meatball with 2 toothpicks sticking out of the bottom of it. I find this hilarious as an image with the meatball and the toothpicks. I'm sorry. It's hysterical. The next person says, I'm making a prediction that your baby will come 2 weeks early. My male colleague with an 18-month-old said jokingly to me, which I responded, you better watch your chair next time you sit as it will break. Literally threatened to hurt the guy. He crossed the line. Now, the statement that he made does not sound that offensive to me, and her response sounds completely insane. She has a whole thing about why it's offensive because he's wishing that her baby arrives premature, and then the baby, like, that's where you can see some pregnant women think that people say crazy things to them that are not at all that crazy. I mean, it's a dumb comment, but okay. This one says, I'm a teacher in our neighborhood of classrooms. We have a staircase. I was walking up it the other day and a student from the top, without even seeing who it was, shouted, who's waddling up the stairs now? When I got to the top and he realized it was me, his eyes got so big, but it was hilarious. I appreciate that some people have enough of a sense of humor that even if they get insulted and told that they're waddling, and people, I mean, there are people in this thread where family members make duck noises and crack at them. Under all the circumstances, you can find it a little bit of funny. Like, it is a little bit amusing. This one says, my husband always says, no, she just ate a really, really big breakfast. Every time someone comments on my belly, it makes me laugh. Some of the comments that people, I mean, I guess I understand a little bit why people want to confirm that you're pregnant before they say anything, because they don't want to insinuate that you're fat. But then if you're not pregnant, then they still insinuated that you're fat. So it doesn't quite work out that way. This one is a little bit amusing. She says, it must be a boy because you look pretty this pregnancy. Boys don't take the beauty from their mothers like girls do. Last pregnancy, you didn't look like this. That actually sounds quite insulting to girls, to be honest. Yeah. The person who made that comment, she also says, my first baby is a girl and this one is a boy. So the person that made that comment got it completely wrong. But, you know, people have these really strange, superstitious ideas about pregnancy and babies and how you can identify gender when you can't. Are those things lactating yet? Because daddy is hungry, followed by obnoxious slurping noises. It's very, very much a yikes moment. This was said by my husband's ex-boss at a wedding in front of a group of adults I've never met before. Yes, he was intoxicated and about 20 years older than me. My husband was not around when it happened, but I told him later and he has since quit that job. Absolutely mortifying. I froze, but I wish I would have told him to go F himself. Yeah, you know, I think alcohol is just really not good for the majority of people. Like most people don't, you just should not be drunk because the amount of, you need a filter, and being totally uninhibited is just not good for you. This one I found hilarious. She says, there was an irate customer at my work that said I was a bitch. I looked so fat that I looked 2 years pregnant. Also deeply insulting, but kind of hilarious. The comment continues, this is when a coworker quickly chimed in, wow, she's actually pregnant, so I wasn't even offended, I was just confused. And the last one is very awkward. She says, you have such a beautiful fetus in your gorgeous womb, says a random lady in the produce section of a grocery store. Shortly after afterwards, I found out that she's a doula midwife. I thought I was going to have to fight some crazy bitch wanting my baby for a second. You see, sometimes some people will even try to say like something actually really nice and complimentary, and then it comes out a little bit strange. Some comments are not good comments, and lots of people say things to pregnant women that they probably should think about before they say them. But yeah, maybe we will revisit this thread and find a few other options later on. That's all we have time for today. If you enjoyed the episode, feel free to like the video or leave a comment if you have anything that you want to say, and subscribe for other content. I will see you in the next one.